So I always hate following Shamilla, but somebody has to do it, so I volunteer as tribute. So my name is Jen Douglas, and my door has just went, and I'm going to ignore it because that's what we do. So my name is Jen Douglas, and I am the engagement lead for Safe Lives, and I work alongside Sam and Shamilla on the Authentic Voice Embedding Lived Experience project. So today I am going to talk a bit about the roots of authentic voice work within Safe Lives and what we've done to include it in our strategy, policy and practice. If you haven't heard about us, we're a UK-wide charity committed to ending domestic. So what you're going to do today is you're going to hear a wee bit about how it came about, our principles that we created and how we use that to inform all of our work, and then essentially what we've learned and kind of thinking about, particularly around resource and building capacity for lived experience work. You'll hear me mention AV throughout this project and throughout this presentation, and what this means is authentic voice, and it's essentially just the language that we use. So to give you a wee bit of context about what we mean when we say authentic voice, we are talking about the sharing of experience and expertise to inform, educate and affect change. So many organisations use different language to describe lived experience work, and you'll hear it maybe as experts by experience or reference groups. And in Safe Life, we've used AV, and our definition is essentially the sharing of that. We do make a wee bit of a distinction between sharing an experience and that of expertise, and it's the reason we do that is because very often the survivors that we work with may not go into detail about what they've experienced or their story, but focus on points for change. It's really important to say that both are equally important and deserve to be recognised, but again, just how we approach this can be different. So in our organisation within Safe Lives, we use a model that I'm not sure if it was Safe Lives, but it's something that we just embed throughout all of our projects, and it's about data, voice and practice, which is exactly how it sounds. It's about looking at data, so what do we know? Hearing people's voice, so what have we heard from kind of people with experience, and also knowing what's happening frontline in practice in order to provide that kind of robust response to ending domestic abuse. So it's a model that really reflects the equal importance of lived experience, and I use it quite often. For example, when I'm starting a new piece of work, I'll use DVP as a rough framework to think deeper about what I'm doing. So how do I know what I know? So what's the data? What's the data telling us? What are people telling us? And what's the kind of the practice element to it as well? I also think it's probably worth mentioning our core organisational values and how they relate. So we talk about being rigorous, we talk about being human and brave, and I think that really lends itself to any kind of AV work that we do, particularly around our policies and practice and strategy. So hopefully I can do this justice, because this isn't my work directly, but I wanted to talk a wee bit about how Safe Lives developed their own approach. And I have to preface this by saying it's just the way that we did it. And I think Shamilla mentioned before that there are so many different ways to carry out lived experience work. We're not saying that this is the right one, we're just saying this is what's worked for us. And we're absolutely proud of the work that we've done, but like everything, it's not always went to plan and we've made mistakes along the way. So I think it's about learning from that and kind of, as Shamilla says, existing in that mess, which when you're an organisation can be really, really difficult to do. So I seen a quote the other day and I had to write this down because I'll probably butcher it, but it said that if you're doing the wrong thing, then doing it better makes you wronger, not righter. If you start doing the right thing wrong, then every step is the right direction to improve. Now that is shocking grammar, but it does kind of make sense. So here's a timeline and what we've done in Safe Lives. So in Safe Lives, we have the most incredible research analysis team. They do a huge amount of research, and this covers, kind of things like surveys, focus groups, kind of one-to-one interviews and taking, kind of numerical data and publishing that. That's the kind of traditional stuff that we would call that authentic voice, because you are hearing survivors' voice. But thinking about it in the kind of wider scale, we knew there was other things that we could be doing. So back in 2016, we had what was called a Survivors, Friends and Family group. What they did is they created a presentation for the Duchess of Cornwall, who's now the Queen Consort, and it went really well. So it kind of put a wee light bulb saying, we actually need to have something a bit more kind of robust and a bit more, kind of thought through. And we needed to have more visibility and connection to Safe Lives, so this Survivor, Friends and Family group. We started off by having a roundtable with expertise to think about how we build a strategy for embedding this kind of work. And also thinking about it coming from the inside out. So it wasn't about saying, right, we need to speak to people who've got lived experience and kind of approach them and bring them in. It was actually saying, right, where's the resource that we have? So it has to come from, the kind of organisation itself. Top of the kind of kind of tick list was that we had to make a commitment to do no harm, but also thinking about remuneration and payment as well. And that thing about leaving a survivor leaving with more than they came with. So organisations will always benefit from listening to survivors. It'll give an authenticity to the work that we do. It gives a real fidelity to the kind of things that we produce. But actually, we need to make sure that people who are doing this work with us also gain as well. A small piece of funding was sought from the big lottery to explore this kind of work, and what happened is that created the Pioneers and Authentic Voice strategy, and that was 2017 and has continued on. So a strategy was created and it was launched at a staff conference, and there was a call for internal pioneers. Pioneers is the language that was set up by the survivors for someone who's experienced domestic abuse and is using their voice. Okay, so that was the kind of pioneers, and we asked for those who already existed within our organisation to come forward and either visibly come forward and be, kind of not out for a better word, but kind of present in the organisation, but also people who maybe didn't want to but still wanted to contribute to the work. So things like, getting involved in the trustee board interviews, setting up some groups, so that's external and internal groups for people that we worked alongside and people we worked with internally. And then also came that we realised that this is actually quite a resource and capacity heavy piece of work. So there was specific roles created, so the Authentic Voice coordinator, and also people having strategic leads, so having that within their job description to say your role is to really embed lived experience and however that may look. Some of the activities they did was pioneer recruitment, so getting more pioneers involved, having some survivor-led public-facing campaigns, and there was lots of things that happened in England and Wales. There was the Ask for Annie, which was a Safe Lives pioneer who brought that forward, which is where you could go into, I think it was Boots, and ask for Annie, and you would be given a safe space to call the police, etc. So lots of different things they did. And some of the things that we created was payment schedules, so figuring out exactly kind of how much people should be paid, and that was in line with what we would pay for anybody who was doing any kind of associate work for us. And then also things like embedding it within our culture group and review and training, etc. I'll talk a wee bit about the AV panel, but the AV panel is very much the kind of linchpin of our Authentic Voice work in Scotland for Safe Lives, but I'll talk about that in a second. And also pulling all the work together that's happened between 2016 to 2022 was the Authentic Voice principles created by survivors, and also a toolkit to help embed that. Now, it wouldn't be right for me not to talk about the AV panel because they are a group of women from across Scotland who support all the work that happens in Safe Lives. We started off as a group that was set up to oversee a specific project that finished last year. And because it was a time limited project, we didn't want to go down a pioneer route of having individuals, because we felt that actually it'd be more kind of appropriate to have people and have that peer support model. It's funded by Delivering Equally Safe and trauma monies, as well as some big lottery support. And we do a lot of things around kind of providing oversight function, providing resource creation, looking at consultations and campaigns, and also pushing forward any individual kind of interest or agenda that the women have as well. So this is how we do it in Scotland. But again, the panel is only one part of a bigger process as well, going back to all that research activities that we spoke about too. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk very briefly about the principles that we use in order to shape all of the work in Safe Lives. These have been recently refreshed by a team of survivors, both internal and external. They're accompanied by a toolkit that we use, which has practical resources to support them themselves. If you're interested in learning about them or seeing more of them, please do get in touch, but I'm just going to kind of quickly go through them at the moment. So the 6 principles, and as I said, they were co-created by pioneers. They were reviewed by the Authentic Voice panel and influenced by our Safe Life values, which is rigorous, brave and human. First off, it's a do no harm approach, and that's to prevent re-traumatisation and increase the positive impact on survivors sharing their experience and expertise. And it recognises that what we do or fail to do can cause harm. So that can be not just emotionally, but physically, financially and legally, particularly when you're thinking about survivors of domestic abuse as well. It's our responsibility to make sure that we've considered the wide range of factors and just really put in place the right conditions for people to be able to share their voice. And one of the really interesting things working alongside RLP is that we definitely have to look at that kind of paternalistic, coming from a non-fear based approach, which I think is really, really important. But it's about maximising the positive impacts of these kind of interactions as well. Safety planning should also be undertaken with survivors, but not for them or on their behalf. Survivors are likely to have their own ways of keeping them safe, and they're the expert in their own experience. So it's about building on that strengths-based approach as well, and thinking about trauma-informed work as well. As a minimum, this means like offering choice of ways to take part, making sure they're kept up to date, and really being clear about how the sphere of influence, how far it goes, and who they'll be working with and what time it'll take as well. So that leads on to experts by experience. So it's about really partnering with a survivor and involving their involvement the same way as you would working with a colleague that is employed in the same organisation as you. Equally, there's a huge power in challenging the idea of what a survivor looks like, and domestic abuse can happen to anyone, and organisations must recognise that it's very likely they'll have that staff who've experienced domestic abuse or been impacted by it. And again, thinking back to that, look at the capacity and the resource that you have existently. So professionals may be survivors and survivors may be professionals as well, so super important. The third one is speaking your truth. So sharing authentic voice always involves a rebalancing of power. So moving away from professionals being the experts in survivors' lives and recognising that, you know, kind of survivors understand their own experience better than anybody. For some people, using your voice can be about taking back power or, you know, kind of rebalancing that. And again, the resource that Shamila talked to you about, the Sheila McKechnie one, It's All About Power, it's a fantastic read, and it really challenges that notion, because there will always be a power imbalance, and it's about us recognising where that lies and taking steps to, you know, kind of reduce that, because again, it can lead to re-traumatisation as well. What this does mean is that organisations, we shouldn't expect that survivors stand for our views or agendas, because they might not. And also it's about making sure that, you know, if somebody is telling you, you know, their experience and it's talking about policy, for example, there is no kind of unintentional punishment for not, you know, kind of going with the group consensus or anything. So that's super important too. Moving on, so the last three, we've got heart and start. So essentially work is built on the knowledge of survivors rather than trying to find a space for it later, and Shamila mentioned this as well. We also need to be really clear about what is heart and start, so survivors and professionals working together, and also survivor-led, and that's when a survivor group leads a project with the support of an organisation. Again, it's about what works best for your, you know, kind of the activities that you want to do, but just being really upfront. Not everything will have, you know, kind of, it won't start an idea from a survivor or, you know, a group of people. So it doesn't mean that you can't ask people to review, but we always talk about like kind of rating and not creating, which again isn't a way that we would normally want to do things. We've been saying it for years when it comes to equality and diversity, that people are not hard to reach, systems are hard to navigate, so society is not equal, and this means that there's often barriers preventing from survivors being able to speak and to be heard as well. So it's responsibility of us to provide opportunities and the right support as well. And to reach those voices, it might be helpful to work with organisations already working well in the community. You know, we're not the experts in everything, so it's about looking for where the expertise is. And finally, caring. This work can be really emotionally demanding, and it may risk, you know, having a negative impact on somebody's mental health and their well-being. So it's essential that we have structures available for support, and this is where the work should begin with. So support might be information, it could be, you know, debriefing, it could be therapeutic support. Having this conversation before you've even kicked the ball in terms of what you're doing is supremely important. But yeah, so that's the principles that kind of underpin our work. We also have the toolkit that goes alongside it as well. I'm just going to finish off with a wee bit about our learning. So what have we learned over the past, you know, kind of 6-7 years doing this work? You must have the buy-in from your senior leadership, your strategic leads, your trustees, because that sets the tone and says that we see this as being important. Think about where your expertise lies, moving that away from them and us. So the othering that you do sometimes, you say, well, I'm going to bring in somebody with lived experience and we're going to ask them their opinion, and then we're going to go away and disappear and do the work. Again, that you're looking at those power structures there. So it's supremely important that we think about, okay, what do we have capacity-wise within ourselves, within our organisation? Make lived experience work and authentic voice work really visible. Write it in your project plans, put it in your outcomes for funders, involve it in your strategy and policy documents. It doesn't have to be a standalone policy, although, you know, that would be amazing if every organisation had that, but it could be saying, okay, here is our, you know, our service that we're running. How do we know this service works? You're going to know that by speaking to people with lived experience as well. How do we know the service is set up properly? Let's go to people with lived experience. So if you have it really visible, it gives you something to report on as well. Also linking it in with any EEDI work that you're doing. So who are you not hearing from? And it's about our responsibility to make steps to find out where those kind of more hidden voices are. One of the most important things that we did in Safe Life Scotland is we built it into all funding applications and we include it on the budget columns. We're really happy to ask to pay for, you know, if you're going to funders and you say, right, okay, I need a photocopier, I need a travel budget, etc. If you value lived experience, put it in. It's not to say you might get what you want, but it's also about saying funders really, really appreciate that feedback loop. They really, really understand that, you know, kind of impacting evidence and data gathering. Your evidence and data gathering will only be as, you know, kind of impactful if you know it's working by involving lived experience. So build it in straight off the bat. Also think about like kind of cross projects. So in Scotland, we have, you know, 4 or 5 different projects with different outputs and different outcomes, but we have an authentic voice kind of person who oversees all of that and says, right, okay, so how are you involving lived experience? Okay, let's think about what we're doing here and join it up over there. So it's really thinking about, you know, just getting that capacity built in. Have it as a standing agenda on your meetings. It doesn't mean that you have to do something every time you have a team meeting, but you could just say, all right, okay, have we done any lived experience work this week or this month? And again, it's just having that language and putting it in place. I won't talk too much about power dynamics, but they're incredibly key, and really educating ourselves on, you know, the power dynamics that exist is supremely important. And then if possible, and I understand this won't be possible for everybody, but having specific roles that have the kind of, you know, ability to say, right, this is important to us, and we'll take you know, kind of responsibility for ensuring that it's embedded. That's really, really helpful as an organisation. Again, it's creating those feedback loops as well, thinking about impact and evidence and data gathering. If you do that from the start, what that'll do is that'll make your output really rich for funders, for, you know, your kind of strategic leads, for, you know, the kind of heads of your organisations. I won't talk too much about payment because we are looking at this because it's such a huge thing when thinking about how you remunerate for people's time. It's not just about payment, it's about things like childcare, equipment. Don't underestimate the, you know, the kind of cost, the physical cost as well as the emotional cost of doing this work. But the project is looking at producing some sort of guidance on that as well. So that was just a wee kind of whistle stop tour. I think I've just checked the time. It's 17 minutes, which is quite possibly the shortest I've ever spoke. So I'm happy to take any questions, and what we'll do is I'll pass over to our next speaker, if that's okay.